June 22nd, 2023. 7 years after Final Fantasy XV came out, we will have the chance to play a new title in the saga. Final Fantasy XVI is in fact upon us. And while the wait wasn't nearly as long as the 10 years we waited for FF15 after 13, it felt very, very slow for fans of the giant of Square Enix. Probably most of us who are waiting for this title are fans of JRPGs, or at the very least, adventure games with lots of character and world development. So I would like to give you the following recommendations of 2 excellent titles that can give you the same feeling of adventure, excitement, surprise, and the feeling of care that we have for the Final Fantasy games while we wait for the new title. These 2 are games that can be played on almost any modern platform possible, except the Switch. For now at least. Starting with probably the direct Final Fantasy competition from Bandai Namco, Tales of Arise. This is the 17th and the last developed title in the Tales of series, but just like Final Fantasy, these are not connected if not only by their main title name, Tales of, so there is no problem if you started with this or any of the main games in the franchise for that matter. Tales of Arise begins with our main character Alphen, a slave from the planet Dana, a planet led by 5 lords from planet Rena that is directly visible from Dana. These lords are running the planet and subjecting its citizens to slave labor to compete in a contest where the winner will become the leader of their home planet Rena. Alphen is a Danan who doesn't remember his past and has the characteristic that he cannot feel any kind of pain while he is wearing a mask that can't be removed and doesn't know how he got it in the first place. The narrative truly starts after a few minutes of the prologue when Alphen meets the other half of our duo of protagonists, Shion from planet Rena, who mysteriously arrives at the same place where Alphen is working as a slave for the Renans, and problems immediately begin to arise with the slave keepers and them. This is all I can say for now, so I don't go into any kind of spoilers in the game's story, which although it's not a particularly unique story, it is very entertaining and especially helped by the charisma of the main characters who get to know each other very well throughout the events of the story and getting along the team of people that unites to their cause as the game goes on. Apart from the story of the game, Tales of Arise is an action RPG where you fight in real time against the enemies you meet while exploring the huge maps. Something curious for those who have never played a Tales of game, it's that the combat in most of these at least happens in an arena apart from the main map, so it feels very action-packed given the small size of the battle arenas without any kind of geography or buildings for defense. It's you facing the enemy at all times, so good use of combos and defense mechanics are vital to succeed, compared to other games like Final Fantasy XV where you can travel a lot of distance and use part of the map as defense while facing the enemies. The battle mechanics feels a bit like a fighting game here, which is only bolstered even by its modality of combos and hit points registries while fighting the enemies. This is a great combat system that works very well for the fast action-based gameplay this game goes for. Like many JRPGs, the gameplay flow of the combat starts off very simple and easy to use, but as the game progresses it becomes more and more complicated, considering weapon damage or magic elements, enemy weak points, handling of enemy types, and management of the resources you have in your inventory. This last point is very important because Tales of Arise is not particularly easy, and all type of resources are mostly very expensive, so it is important to have good management of your inventory to avoid grinding, although grinding can be required for many of the better weapon crafting that the game has as well. Another point that I would like to mention the most is the visual quality of Tales of Arise. Very few games can achieve a watercolor style on the level of Tales of Arise. This makes it feel unique amongst the sea of games that seek realism as their visual goal. Sure, Tales of Arise has its limitations, especially in draw distance, where the enemies or part of the geography appear very close to the character, but this is not especially distracting due to how incredible the game can look in many other aspects. I'd like to say the same about the soundtrack, which shows that a lot of care and love was put into it, but it really fails to deliver emotional impact to the player apart from the battle track and lyric-based songs. This feels like a filler rather than the main feature of the game, which for long role-playing games should be a priority to get good quality songs since the player will be listening for hours on end while exploring its world and story. Apart from those small details, Tales of Arise is one of the best JRPGs I have played in recent years, and one of the games that should make the wait easier for the new Final Fantasy game. And well, as I mentioned before, there are 17 of these titles, so there's plenty to play even after you're done with Tales of Arise and Final Fantasy XVI. The other game I wanted to mention is one that really surprised me in many ways. I didn't expect that a title that was given so little credit would have so much of an impact on me after I finished its story. From Studio Tri-Ace, creators of games like Valkyrie Profile, Radiator Stories, and their best known IP with Star Ocean. The last Star Ocean game, titled The Divine Force, from a series that bears its name in 5 other main releases too, but like Final Fantasy or Tales of, these can be played individually, despite the fact that there is a chronology of these 6 games. But it is not one of the most important points of the Star Ocean series as a whole. The Divine Force has the characteristic of being a sci-fi and medieval game at the same time, where characters from advanced civilizations have to survive on an underdeveloped planet. The use of royal hierarchies and medieval hand-to-hand battles is common in the main planet of the game, versus the more advanced scenery and combat is for the other areas the cast travels to. This contrast of civilizations is very interesting, especially with the interactions the party has when discussing the difference of their cultures and day-to-day lives. This is true of many Star Ocean games actually, where exploration of various planets, developed and underdeveloped, is the norm. The Divine Force is no exception. The exploration of its maps and planets is a key point of the game, giving the player large interconnected maps with many different ecosystems, from dense forests full of monsters, small towns with a lot of charm, and fully fledged kingdoms to futuristic cities and environments. These are a joy to visit and explore. Another key characteristic of the game is Duma, a robot that is introduced in the beginning of the story that takes the role of being the main mean of vertical transportation, making any of the controlled characters able to fly for a short time, giving the player the choice to go and explore basically any part of the terrain, including building roofs, hills, mountains, and even trees that may have resources or hidden treasures for us to discover. Speaking of the characters, this is one of the casts that I've enjoyed the most in recent years, and although the game doesn't have the same scope of other heavy titles like the Xenoblade or Nier games in terms of character development, where the relationship between the main protagonists is one of the most important themes of the game, the Divine Force does give the option to create a more personal bond between the cast with moments called private actions, where the game gives the opportunity to know a specific character more thoroughly, sharing more personal details of them with all the other characters that we have in our main party. This makes for a closer and deeper relationship through the game that feels more personal, and it's something that many other JRPGs I've played in the past have failed to achieve. This happens in Tales of Arise as well, with the skits that take place in between the story progression. But in Arise, their focus was directly on the story of the game, and not specifically on the development of the characters on an individual level outside of what's happening in the plot, which Star Ocean does a terrific job with. This title is a bit more difficult to recommend due to its overall quality. It is noticeable that it is a lower budget project compared to Tales of Arise. From the slightly more simplified combat, the balance with the difficulty in some parts of the game, the extremely linear maps, and especially the movement and visual aspects of the characters in its presentation and cutscenes, showing a bit stiff compared to many other modern releases. You can really notice the difference in budget, resources, and time of development here. I say this even knowing that for me, Star Ocean, The Divine Force, was a more satisfying game to play through than Tales of Arise, and I prefer it even over many JRPGs that came out in recent years. Even so, I can't deny the visual quality that the game can achieve in many of its beautiful map designs, how good the combat was by the end of the game, and how the development and the relationship of the characters evolved by the finish line of the story. Of course, I would like to talk more about the story of the game too, but I would prefer those who are going to play it to really experience it from the beginning. Just know that this game is really special despite what it may seem from the outside. I'm sure many who have already gone through it agree with me. And just like Tales of Arise, if you like this game, there are still many other Star Ocean titles available in modern platforms waiting to be discovered. Now, to conclude with this video, just let's hope that this new release brings the name of Final Fantasy to its former glory again. We still have a few weeks to look for adventures and stories that can make the wait easier. These games I mentioned are just a few of the many out there that can compete with Final Fantasy for the throne of the best JRPG series of all time. Thank you very much for your time. I'll talk to you in the next one.